your being here underscores the importance that our public schools are to the strength and the future of our Minneapolis community. I also want to reiterate my concern and sadness both about the discord between MFT and MPS and about the fact that our students are not in our classrooms learning today. The MPS board is doing everything we can to get our students back into school. I'm getting calls from people saying, what's the sticking point? Why aren't you coming to an agreement? I've been at the table and it's been really hard. But I'm here to say very clearly that the sticking point is just what Superintendent Graff will tell you. We can't spend money that we don't have. Our resources that we do have must support building a more equitable MPS with teachers who reflect the diversity of the students that they are serving. That includes providing livable wages to our lowest paid workers. Yet MFT has made no movement toward realistic salary proposals, and they have removed any reference to ways we can build a more diverse workforce. All of our teachers are undeniably the heartbeat of our community, and they deserve as much as they are asking for. But I know of no school district that's been financially weathered staff increases to teachers' current request, now down to 12%, or an additional $95 million over 2 years. We just don't have that money. Providing that kind of salary increase would mean massive cuts across Minneapolis public schools. And we all know where those cuts historically have happened. It's going to affect our students of color and our students most in need. I want to deeply thank our educators for everything they've done for our students, especially over the past 2 years. They have, in some cases, quite literally held students and their families together. But I'm also deeply saddened that we have moved to a strike. Minneapolis has to be fiscally responsible, and Minneapolis has the opportunity to change the face of education by changing our teacher contracts to allow for building a more diverse staff. On behalf of our students, I'm here in hopes that that will happen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you, Chair Ellison. I'm just going to start by telling you how difficult this time is right now. A range of emotions. Obviously, we're here because we have not done right by our students, and it's going to impact them for who knows how long. I was at a school this morning and had an opportunity to talk to a principal, and we were just discussing what yesterday looked like as students were unclear as to, our students were discussing like, what's tomorrow going to look like? And the anguish and uncertainty and sadness is beyond words. What we've been through for the last 2 years with this pandemic, the social unrest, the racial reckoning that we have here in Minneapolis, and now we have our students, again, in this space where they're not in school, with their teachers who they care about very much, learning is gut-wrenching. So the reality is we do have shared values. We know that our educators, our ESPs, need to be paid more. That's very, very apparent, very clear to both me, our board members, the public, and we value the work that they do. Every day they're right there with our students, supporting them, whether that's in the classroom or transitioning to special, or talking to them about what they want to do in the future, modeling for them all these things. So it's something that we know we need to do better on. Unfortunately, the reality is that we're resource limited. The finances that we have are not enough to provide the support that we need to provide. Every year, we struggle with the underfunding for special education and English learner services. About $60 million every year. We do our best in this district to make sure that we are fiscally responsible, good stewards of our money, making sure that when we have money that goes to support students, that it's very direct It's in the classroom. It's curriculum that is relevant for our students. And every year, despite all of our attempts, we end up with a shortfall. And so this past year, we were fortunate to receive COVID relief dollars, and we put about $38 million into our budget this year so that we could stabilize our staff, so we could make sure that we paid them the wages that we currently have in our contracts. And it's still not enough. And so next year, we're in the process right now of developing our budget. Even with putting money in from our ESSER dollars, we still have a $20 million plus deficit gap that we have to close. This is constant. I've been here almost 6 years. Every single year, we go through this process of saying, okay, where can we squeeze more funds? Where do we have more to put here? How can we do more with less? And you know what happens? We keep getting more and more challenges. More demands, more requests of what we need to be doing. Our kids need mental health support. Our teachers need mental health support. We know that. We've taken money from our ESSER funds to invest in that area. We have school-based mental health clinic access at every one of our schools in Minneapolis public schools. Contracts, every one of them. We're actually keeping those that are in place right now open during the strike. And it's not enough. We spend about $60 million from taxpayers in Minneapolis public schools to address our class size so that we can maintain a class size that is reasonable for educators and for students and for families, because that's what they want. $60 million that we ask the taxpayers to pay for. In addition to what we receive from the federal and state government, minus the $60 million for underfunding of special education and English language services. At some point, it has to stop. We have all these priorities that we want to have happen, and we don't have the resources for it. And someone's got to be able to say, I'm sorry, I can't do it. And so it's very difficult to have these conversations about what should we be doing, what shouldn't we be doing, when we've got our kids that aren't in school. And we've got our teachers who I value greatly and dearly. I'm an educator myself, a teacher at heart. I come from a family of educators, so I know exactly the challenges of what it means to wake up every day and not have the resources that you need in a building. This is it. This is the opportunity. And if we can't fix this, it's not going to be just bad for our Minneapolis public schools. It's going to be bad for public education. And most importantly, it's going to be bad for our kids. So I'm frustrated, I'm sad, I'm disappointed, I'm concerned. And at the same time, I want our educators, I want our teachers to know that I value and appreciate and I respect the work that they do. Having been an educator, having been a principal, having been a teacher, never having been that during a pandemic though, I can only imagine the challenges that they're facing. And I also feel very, very concerned about what's happening with our families right now. They don't know what tomorrow's going to be. We're attempting to provide meal service so families will be able to pick up meals, bagged meals at our schools. You know, the questions come up around supervision. What are we doing for supervision? We have a very, very limited number of schools that will be able to provide extreme supervision care upon request because we don't have the staff available. My ask is that we get to the table, we negotiate in good faith, and we figure this out as quickly as possible. I've asked our team to be available night and day. We've got to settle this. We've got to get it figured out. We've got to come together. At the end of the day, we're still going to have to walk through those doors and support our students through the rest of this school year. That's the immediate thing right now. The long-term issue for us is we've got to figure out this funding. We value education. We value what it provides for our students, public education. We've got to do things differently. I'll take questions if you have any. I know that there's probably some technical questions that we've not been able to speak to around what those proposals have been. Obviously, during mediation, we want to honor the process and make sure that we're mediating in good faith, negotiating in good faith. I think we're still very far apart in terms of where those proposals are. Nearly $100 million differences. And as I've mentioned already with our budget, that I don't see a way out of that. I mean, we will need to get very, very creative and figure out how we can close the gap on some of those requests. But we're committed to working with both of our unions, being very clear that we value the work that they do. We know we need to pay our ESPs more. That is something we're committed to doing. We just need to make sure that we can do that in a way that keeps us financially sustaining this district. So the short-term needs that we have, we need to address those, but also being mindful of what that future is going to look like, because we aren't going to be able to do it on our own. We've asked the taxpayers of Minneapolis repeatedly to help out, support. We've asked our educators to hold back a little bit, to wait. And most concerningly, we've asked our students and families. So it's time for the adults to step up and do what's right.
Superintendent, two questions. You said $100 million in part. Is that between the cost of your two proposals? We've talked about a budget deficit in the past. It's about that number. So is that the actual number you're in part?
So it's right now, when you look at the MFT's cost, their total cost of all the things they put on the table, it's an additional $160 million annually above what we have currently budgeted. And there are some great proposals in terms of what we would like to do. But as I've said time and time again, and the chair's heard me say this, we can do anything, we can't do everything. So we're having to make decisions around, okay, is it compensation? Is it for our mental health supports? Is it for making sure we have those resources that are needed in the classroom with the curricular materials? I mean, it's all these different trade-offs that every district in Minnesota is going through. That's nothing new.
But the $100 million between the two. Here it's 60 and there at 160.
No, it's a little more technical than that. I mean, again, if their total package of things that they're asking in their proposal were added up, it's roughly $166 million above what we've already budgeted for.
When it comes to the, when you talk to the unions, the union leaders, they're very clear. They want $35,000 minimum for the ESPs, and then they were at one point asking for 20% general wage increase. Can you clarify for our viewers, where are you on those proposals? They had said that you weren't willing to go there.
So I think the range was 20 to 40% increase, wage increase. And the difficulty, again, is what dollar amount do we have to spend on not only their proposal, but then the teacher's proposal. And so with a deficit right now of roughly $20 million that we were, trying to put together so we could present a budget going forward, this is adding on to that. So it's very difficult to say what that dollar amount is going to be, but I can tell you it's not going to be 20 or 40%. Like we can't figure that one out. In our current space, we've got to have some back and forth. We've got to talk creatively about what that means. We have some one-time money, the ESSER money that we've already allocated for things that we're unwilling to shift off of because it has a direct impact for students. But we can have some creative conversations about how we might be able to move that around. But here's the catch to that as well. That money has to be spent September 2024. So anytime you put that into ongoing costs, there's a risk. And that's the space we are in. What's the risk? What is the potential of that risk? What does it mean? It means that those kids we have now may suffer long-term in a couple years. And are we willing to take that risk? Based on what we've received in the past, I can't say that. Based on the financial situation that I've been dealing with, this board's been dealing with for 5.5 years, you get a 2% increase, and you're talking about inflation now. What CPI is, what is it, over 7%? So how are we supposed to address that? I mean, everyone in business knows this. Everyone in the community knows it. Fill up your gas tank. How much more is it now? So we know we have to do something different. It's just that we are being asked to do that as a district. We're being asked to put these dollars in motion. And wanting to be responsible, not only fiscally responsible, but responsible to our students in the short term and the long term, that's the challenge. That's the dilemma. We can't do this on our own. There's got to be people coming together. And at the end of the day, we need to get our kids back in school. We need to be at the table, having these conversations about how can we get creative with the resources that we have? What flexibility do we have? And we can't stand this far apart. That's not going to work.
How confident are you that you can get kids back in school, even this week, if you are this far apart?
I can speak to what I'm willing to do, and I'm willing to negotiate round the clock, 24/7, starting today, tomorrow. And I know it takes two in mediation and negotiation. So we certainly have some work to do to repair that kind of conversation. But that's all I can give you is my word and my commitment to do that.
Have they not been willing to do that?
We've been at the table attempting to negotiate for many, many months. We went into mediation in December. We had several negotiations where we were passing proposals back and forth, and they were the same proposals that we had. So I think the bottom line is that we know things were not going the way we wanted them to go, both sides. We just need to get back to the table.
Have these conversations ramped up, sorry, just to follow up, have these conversations ramped up at the Capitol? I mean, clearly you're referring to other sources here of monies. I know the federal, there's clearly talk about changes with regard to funding for education federally as well, but has anything ramped up even in the last few days or weeks at the Capitol?
Can you say more about that? When you say ramped up, what do you mean?
Have you guys had more conversations with lobbyists or with your representatives or with the governor?
I've had a conversation with the governor about other topics. I've not talked to him specifically about our financial situation here, but I think it's very apparent that we're in a different space and time when we have a budget surplus of $9 billion. But it's not going to be just one person making the decision. And I think that's what I'm getting at here when I say the adults need to come together. Like, we can go to our corner and say, this is all we're willing to do. But at the end of the day, our kids are going to be the ones who suffer from it. And I don't want to be overly dramatic with it, but that's the reality. We're talking about adults here needing to step up and say, this is what we prioritize, this is what we believe in, and we're willing to commit to doing this both in the near term and in the long term. So it's going to take everyone. It doesn't do any good to send out a note of, I support this individual, and put the blame on one person. Like that, I'm not going to do that. That hasn't proven to be very effective. And so if we're really committed to what we believe in as a state, as a nation, about public education and the values that we have with getting our kids in person and learning in front of their teacher and in front of those educators who are there to support them wholeheartedly, then we need to do things differently. And until that happens, all of this is show.
Superintendent, simultaneously, St. Paul schools reached an agreement to avert a strike. The union here says they achieved many of the things that the union here is seeking, and wonder if they could do it there, why can't we do it here?
We're open to that conversation. I think we're somewhat similar in our urban, kind of setting, but we're also very different in what they have in their contract and how we structure things in our contract. But definitely aligned to the values. When you talk about class size, I was a teacher for almost a decade. I had 42 kids in a 4th grade classroom one year. 42. We don't have that average here in Minneapolis public schools. Our elementary classroom on average is right around 20. Now, certainly that's an average, so we have lower numbers and we have higher numbers. But I also know that that comes with a cost. That comes with a significant amount of cost. For every teacher we have to add, there's a $100,000 cost to that. So where are we going to get the money to do that? We have to figure this out, right? So we value it. We value that. We attempt to make that happen. But if we are still operating with underfunding for education, and we're going to tell families that, yeah, we'll put this out there and we'll adhere to it, and then not being able to do that, I can't do that.
If St. Paul's got the same funding formulas and they're very similar, I guess, demographically, and what might they be doing differently that they can afford some of these things that the union here is asking that it sounds like they're able to give there?
I haven't seen their latest negotiated agreement, so I can't speak directly to it.
Okay.
But I can also tell you that they had to close a couple schools just recently. And part of what I heard when I came to Minneapolis Public Schools is that we value our schools and we needed to make sure that we kept them open. And so we went through a very, very challenging process to look holistically across the district and see how we could reprioritize our resources and invest in schools that we had not been investing in. And the goal is to make sure that through those investments over the next year or two, we can then fairly evaluate what's happening with the number of students in our school and the viability of that school staying open. And unfortunately, we hit this pandemic, and we also have these funding challenges that are preventing us from really seeing that to fruition right now. So those are probably conversations that are going to happen in the near future, especially if we don't get a change to our funding. Because we know we have to make some investments that are being asked by not only the 2 unions we're talking about here, but other unions that we have. We're going to have to invest in our employees. We know that. And so the only way we're going to be able to sustain that is by getting additional funding. You either have to increase your revenue or decrease your expenses. Those are the 2 options that we have. And I can't say that I have a good handle on how to increase revenue because I'm about educating students.
Superintendent, you talked a little bit before the strike about the difficulty that declining enrollment has been for your finances. Are you worried that more kids are going to bleed away during the strike if it goes on?
What we need right now is our kids in school. We need them to have the reassurances of the adults who care about them and who are there to support them in not only their learning, but in their well-being and their care on a day-to-day basis. That's what we need. That's what our families want. The emails that I'm receiving, our kids want to be in school. They want to be with their teachers. We know that through the last 2 years that's been extremely difficult around just what it means to be a part of a community when you don't have that consistency.
Have you had any talks today? And if not, when will those resume?
Talks with whom?
Union.
So the conversation I had just prior to this meeting was with the mediators. We work with the Bureau of Mediation Services, the commissioner, and our appointed a mediator. And my ask of him was to get us back to the table. My ask yesterday was to keep us at the table. And so that's my goal, is that we can be, having conversations around not only what we are saying we agree to in our values, but how do we address that from a financial matter.
Will
And
you be
that's,
back at the table shortly?
I would like to be there right now.
You don't, but you don't, there's
I
no
don't-
time that's been set or anything?
Well, I told them we're here, ready tomorrow, ready today, ready the day after. Again, this is a mutual thing. You have to have two parties. And so I appreciate all those people who are telling me you need to negotiate. But I also know that we have to come back together. I mean, there's a lot of tension right now about what is happening. And there's a lot of emotion. As I started this conversation with all of you, I mean, it's the range of emotions. And it's not only affecting, those parties who are involved, it's affecting the whole community and our students. So my goal is to get us at the table and to get us to an agreement as quickly as possible.
The
I
union
have a
says
question.
they're gonna be back at the table in 25 minutes.
With us,
That's what they told me.
well, you obviously have more information than I do.
Okay.
Did
So
you?
that's what
Did
I
you?
was getting at, like,
what-
you don't know of a time or anything.
Can you tell me
like
who
that.
shared that with you?
Yes. Greta,
Okay. And did she say who she's meeting with?
I can ask her. I didn't ask her.
Yeah. I mean, that's great. That's great. If the table includes us, that's perfect. I'm just. I don't know. I'm trying
Question
to.
for Chair Ellison.
Yes.
Oh.
Sorry to make you get up, but
No, that's okay. Yes.
Team President this morning said, appealed to the school board and said that you need to step in and take over the negotiations here. It doesn't sound like there's a lot of daylight between you and the administration here. Is that?
Yeah, we completely, so our board has made these decisions and set the parameters and then told administration, this is what we believe in, this is what we want to see, and believe that the administration is sharing those with the union. I was here on Sunday all day. I was here on Monday all day and even called 2 other directors to come in and meet with the union to share their thoughts. And so we are having conversations even at the bargaining table. So. We'll come back.
So just to clarify, it's my understanding that the mediators are reaching out to MFT to talk with them. As I mentioned just before this press conference, they met with us and we expressed our interest and our desire to be negotiating. So I would make the assumption that that's probably what the conversation is about.
But the mediator's the one that, like, do you have to have the mediators to get you to the table and then you talk about the certain proposal? Is that?
So mediation in Minnesota is interesting. And that's that Minnesota interesting term. From my experience, mediation has been when you are unable to settle a contract, that you would contact a mediator, work with some bureau, and they would come in. And again, in my experience, they would say, okay, I'm here for 2 weeks. So let's get this done. Let's get to work on it. And what I have encountered is that we filed for mediation. That was a choice the district made because we felt we weren't making the progress we wanted to in the conversations. We had basically, two sides and one was over here and one was over here. And so the mediation process is to bring people together, You have to compromise, We've been in mediation since December. January, February, we're now in March. So it's a little different experience than what I've encountered. And so that's been difficult because we obviously know that we have shared values. And we know that we want to get to keeping our kids in school.
Superintendent, the union has been saying they believe there is enough funding available to achieve what they're asking for. And you're saying that there's a pretty significant deficit. Where's the disconnect there in what you're saying and what they're saying?
Well, I would encourage all of you to take a look at our documents. They're on Board Book. We have finance meetings on a monthly basis. And, I think it is always a question of, we have a pretty big budget, $650 million budget, roughly, when you're talking about operation-wise. And so when you hear, that it only costs $38 million or it costs $50 million, I mean, those are real numbers and that's not anything to kind of just dismiss. But the challenge is that with many of those costs, they have ongoing expenses. We refer to as compounding costs. So $2,000 this year, if you move along a salary schedule in some cases, is more than $2,000. It compounds. And you also have to have that revenue to pay for that. When we talk about those one-time grants, those ESSER dollars that we received, they don't continue beyond 2024, the fall of 2024. So we've got to use those dollars in the best way possible to impact our students. And we went through a process to do that. And some people, may disagree with what our decisions were. And I accept that and I understand that. But we also did it with the realization that after those dollars were gone, whatever we invested in was not going to be able to continue. And that's because we looked at our budget projections and what we had been receiving in revenue and what we were spending. And so that's the tension. And that's where we are right now, absent any new money, is that we're going to have to go back and reevaluate and get creative and probably take greater risks. Okay, we're not risk averse, but when I walked into this district and we had a $13 million deficit, the month I walked in and we were operating in that, and then we had a compounding deficit the following year, and we had a fund balance that was well below our policy and close to statute operating debt, I couldn't be, taking great risk. I had to take the prudent approach of saying, let's get this set up the way it needs to be set up so we can have flexibility and we can take risks in the future. And unfortunately, where we are right now in this pandemic and the uncertainty with, what the cost of living is going to look like, and the essential flat funding, which we're grateful that we're receiving funding, but it's been flat, especially with inflation, and the underfunding that we have for special education and English language learners or EL services, that's a big risk. That's a big risk.
Can you speak to the tone and tenor of the conversation? You mentioned both sides have to compromise. Has there been any indication have there been any compromises?
We've moved, and in fairness, the MFT teachers on their proposal, they went from I think an initial 20% in the first year and 5% in the second year to I think they came down to 15% in the first year, 5% in the second year, and then 12.5% in the first year, 5% in the second year, to 12% in the first year and 5% in the second year. So they've moved. But again, doing the calculation on that number, and if the priority is really addressing our ESP group, that's still a very large number that we have to try and figure out where that's going to come from.
That 20% is for educators or teachers, or is that the ESP?
That was a teacher. That was their initial proposal, and they moved down from
so
there.
That's separate from the ESP.
Yeah, that's separate from the ESP group.
Well, that's the general wage proposal, right?
That's the general wage proposal for teachers, yeah. And I'm sure they have all that information on their website. But it's a back and forth, and that's the whole idea behind mediation, is that the mediator comes over and says, you need to make an adjustment. So you send your proposal back over, and typically what happens is the other party will counter.
We'll take one last question and then we're gonna wrap it up, so you can go ahead.
Yeah, so back to ESPs for a second. The union keeps saying, and you mentioned earlier that their bottom line thing they don't want to compromise on is a minimum of $35,000 for all ESPs. Can you talk about where talks are with that? Is that totally out of reach? Where are things with the negotiations around ESP pay?
So we have not seen any shift from their first proposal. They submitted to us. They kind of said this is where we are. So we obviously have to have more discussion around that. I think one thing that I've experienced throughout my career is with that position, education assistant or teacher assistant, whatever the term might be used in different districts, I've not seen a 40-hour employee. The school day is usually 6.5 hours. And so it's not very common, at least in my experience, where you have a set 40-hour schedule. I've seen, fewer than 40 hours, and you can add those on for different different unique situations and needs. But certainly we want to expand those hours if possible, which would increase wages. So that's where we are as a district. And obviously, like I said, more conversations have to happen. But the only place they can happen really is not here. It's at the table. And so that's where we need to be. And we need to do it sooner rather than later so that we can get our students back in school, learning with their teachers in a place where they enjoy being a part of their school community. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent, and thank you, everyone.